If anyone ever tells you you're not allowed to read a book, you should immediately read that book. For centuries, the Vatican and the early Church tried to erase a single manuscript from human history, labeling it heresy and burying it in the shadows of the Dark Ages. But the Book of Enoch didn't just disappear. It is a detailed record of a cosmic crime, a biological and spiritual invasion by beings known as the Watchers. They didn't come to save us. They came to claim us, fathering a hybrid lineage of giants known as the Nephilim that turned the earth into a slaughterhouse. While the Bible gives us a sanitized version of the flood, Enoch reveals a terrifying perspective. Humanity wasn't the source of the rot. We were the host. If the truth was harmless, it wouldn't need to be buried. But to understand the cover-up, we must first look at the architects of the silence. The text we call 1 Enoch did not descend from the clouds in a burst of light. It was born in the dirt and the heat of the southern Levant, Judea or Samaria, sometime between 300 and 100 years before the Common Era. These were the years of the Second Temple, a volatile era of occupation and spiritual rebellion. It was composed in Aramaic, the rhythmic, gritty street language of the people, before it began a long, desperate journey across continents. It was eventually swallowed by the high mountains of Ethiopia, translated into Ge'ez, classical Ethiopic, the only tongue that saw fit to preserve it in its entirety, while the rest of the world tried to erase it from memory. By the time the Dead Sea Scrolls were buried at Qumran in 200 BC, this text was already sacred. But it wasn't a single book. It was a patchwork. Scribes had stitched together 5 distinct booklets: the Book of Watchers, the Parables, the Astronomical Book, the Dream Visions, and the Epistle of Enoch. Each section carries the fingerprints of a different priestly group, each claiming to hold the true testimony of the patriarch who was 7th from Adam. They were not just writing stories, they were documenting a cosmic crime. But here is the shadow that lingers over the parchment. Whose voices are truly recorded in these 5 distinct accounts? Genesis 5 offers a single, tantalizing line that has haunted theologians for millennia. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. In a book of genealogies defined by the rhythmic monotony of, and he died, Enoch's exit is a jarring anomaly. He didn't die, he was extracted. Genesis 6 immediately follows with a cryptic account of the sons of God looking upon the daughters of men and finding them beautiful. It mentions the birth of the Nephilim, the giants, and then the narrative abruptly shifts to the flood, as if several chapters of the world's most terrifying history had been ripped out. The Book of Enoch is the bridge across that silence. It plugs itself into the Genesis gap, expanding a few verses of cosmic scandal into a detailed record of biological and spiritual invasion. These were not metaphorical bad influences. They were the Iran, the fallen, a splinter group of celestial observers who looked at our world and decided to claim it. When the text speaks of them coming in unto the daughters of men, it describes the birth of a hybrid lineage, a bloodline that did not belong to the natural order. This was the genesis of the monsters. A new branch was grafted onto the human family tree, one that hummed with a strange, unnatural light and a hunger that would eventually consume the earth. At the center of this cosmic dereliction of duty stood the Iran, the awake, the sleepless, the watchers. 200 of these celestial sentinels were assigned to a post that overlooked the cradle of man, tethered to the boundary between the eternal and the temporal. As they looked down, the detachment required of their kind began to dissolve. They didn't just observe, they desired. Semyaza, their chieftain, and Azazel, his dark shadow, saw the daughters of men and realized that to act alone was to face solitary ruin. They gathered the 200 on the jagged, ice-scarred summit of Mount Hermon, a place whose very name means forbidden. There, amidst the thin air and the swirling mist, Semyaza voiced the fear of a traitor. "I fear you will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin." The response was a chilling display of collective defiance. They did not retreat. Instead, they bound themselves by mutual imprecations, a blood oath of total commitment. They swore to descend together, to take wives, and to father a lineage that should never have existed. As the watchers stepped from the clouds onto the solid, unforgiving earth, the hierarchy of heaven was shattered. They had traded their immortality for the warmth of human skin. The descent of the watchers was not a mission of mercy. It was an infection. When these 200 entities breached the atmosphere and bound themselves to Earth's soil, they brought with them a cache of celestial secrets that humanity was never meant to handle. This was the true theft of fire, and it burned everything it touched. Azazel was the architect of our external destruction. He leaned over the primitive forges of men and taught them how to reshape the bones of the earth into weapons of slaughter. Swords, knives, and shields, the technology of the kill. But he didn't stop at the skin. He taught the making of mirrors and the art of beautifying the eyelids, introducing the poisons of vanity and deception into the human spirit. While Azazel armed the hand, Semyaza targeted the mind. He whispered the secrets of sorcery, the cutting of roots, and the high science of herbalism, blurring the line between healing and hexing. The sky itself became a map of manipulation. Other watchers revealed the movement of the stars, the tracking of the lunar phases, and the reading of the sun's path. They gave us astrology, not as a gift of wonder, but as a system of omens to shackle the human will to fate. Every scrap of forbidden knowledge they traded for the company of women was a brick in the wall of our own corruption. Civilization didn't just advance, it mutated. Was this sudden leap in technology a gift of progress, or was it a curated destruction of human innocence designed to make us more like them? But the true nightmare wasn't the knowledge, it was the hunger of their offspring. When divine light is poured into vessels of clay, the result is rarely holy. The Watchers did not just create hybrids, they birthed a biological catastrophe. These were the Nephilim. To look upon them was to see the physics of nature broken. They grew beyond the capacity of the land to sustain them, towering hundreds of feet into the air, their shadows stretching like cold stains across the fertile valleys. At first, they were kings. Then, they were gods. Finally, they became something else entirely. Uncontrollable predators of the very world they were born into. The Book of Enoch describes a descent into a visceral, red madness. When the Nephilim had exhausted the harvests of man, they did not starve. Their eyes turned toward the hands that had fed them. The giants began to devour the flesh of humanity. This wasn't just warfare. It was a food chain being reordered by monsters. The earth became a slaughterhouse, soaked in the blood of its own children. Then the corruption deepened. They turned their appetites toward the birds, the beasts, and the fish, consuming one another in a frantic, cannibalistic spiral of extinction. The planet groaned under the weight of this horror. The literal cries of the dying reached the higher heavens, piercing the silence of the celestial court. 4 archangels, Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, and Uriel, looked down through the clouds and saw a world turning black with gore. They saw a planet that had been turned into a laboratory of agony and excess. Therefore, the heavens had no choice but to purge the world with water and iron. The Great Flood was supposed to be the end. a celestial reset button designed to drown the corruption and wash the hybrid filth from the face of the earth. Yet, the question of genetic survival lingers like a ghost. If the flood was intended to be a total biological purge, how did the blood of the Watchers survive the deep? Scholarly and fringe theories point to post-flood incursion, the idea that a second, smaller group of Watchers descended after the waters receded, or the seed of Ham theory, suggesting that the genetic taint was carried through the ark itself by the wives of Noah's sons. Regardless of how it survived, the results were undeniable. Centuries after the world was cleansed, the Israelites stood on the edge of the Promised Land, and what they found wasn't just milk and honey, it was terror. In Numbers 13, the scouts return from Canaan with trembling hands. They speak of the Anakim, a race of such staggering scale that the Hebrews felt like grasshoppers beneath their boots. These weren't mere tall men. They were the echoes of the Nephilim, a lingering shadow of the fallen. They found the Zamzummim, the Emim, and the Rephaim, tribal warrior architects who lived within megalithic walls that no human hand could have lifted. These cities weren't built for us. They were built for something else. This explains the terrifying brutality of the Old Testament. People wonder why Yahweh's commands were so absolute. No prisoners, no mercy, total eradication of entire bloodlines. It wasn't just a war for land. It was a desperate biological purge, a hunt for the last remnants of a forbidden lineage that refused to die. By the 2nd century, the Book of Enoch was not a fringe curiosity. It was a cornerstone. It sat on the shelves of the Essenes at Qumran and was gripped tightly by the first Christians who saw in its pages the roadmap of the apocalypse. Even the New Testament's own writers quoted it as holy breath. But as the 3rd century bled into the 4th, the wind shifted. The radical, dusty faith of the catacombs was invited into the marble halls of power. When Christianity aligned itself with the Roman Empire, the wild flickers of mysticism had to be extinguished to make room for the cold, steady light of the state. In 363 AD, at the Council of Laodicea, the first blow was struck. The bishops gathered, their silk robes rustling against stone, and drew a line in the sand. They listed the books permitted for public reading, and Enoch was cast into the outer darkness. By 397 AD, the Council of Carthage hammered the final nails into the coffin of the Western canon. Intellectual giants like Jerome and Augustine provided the theological muscle for this purge. They dismissed the accounts of fallen angels and giant offspring as too strange, too physical, and far too dangerous for disciplined imperial subjects. They didn't just want to define God, they wanted to sanitize him. To the Roman mind, a book that spoke of celestial insurrections and forbidden technology was a blueprint for chaos. The text was systematically scrubbed from the scriptoriums of Europe, its memory fading into the hiss of an extinguishing candle. While the intellectual walls of Rome and Constantinople were being raised to seal the past, one kingdom remained standing in the shadows of the Horn of Africa, the kingdom of Aksum. Long before Europe had finished debating the divinity of Christ, Ethiopia had already made Christianity its heartbeat. In this high-altitude sanctuary, the Book of Enoch wasn't a heresy, it was a holy inheritance. Carried south by Egyptian Jews and fleeing scribes, the manuscript found a home among the jagged plateaus and mist-shrouded monasteries of the Simeon Mountains. While the West burned its copies or let them rot in forbidden vaults, the monks of Ethiopia hand-copied the Ge'ez text for 1,500 years, guarding it like a relic from another world, until it was rediscovered by James Bruce in 1773. While the Ethiopian highlands guarded the secrets of the first book, another shadow of Enoch's legacy was silently drifting through the frozen archives of Eastern Europe. The second Book of Enoch lived in the margins, preserved only in Old Church Slavonic, tucked away in the damp stone silence of Orthodox monasteries for over 1,000 years. Scholars call it the Slavic Enoch, and if the first book was a legal document of a crime, this Second Testament is a blueprint of the machine. In this version, Enoch isn't just a witness, he is a passenger. These texts describe a vertical odyssey through 10 distinct heavens, led by glowing entities with faces like the sun. They didn't show him gardens or clouds, they showed him mechanics. He describes celestial forges where the weather is manufactured, storehouses where the very fabric of time is measured, and the Grigori, a silent, mourning order of the watchers who stood paralyzed by the weight of their own fall. But it is the climax of this journey that haunts the edges of theology. As Enoch reaches the final 10th heaven, he is brought before the great glory. Here, the humanity of the patriarch is stripped away. Under the gaze of the infinite, his skin is peeled back, not with pain, but with light. He is transformed into Metatron, the prince of the countenance, the voice of the Creator, a being so powerful the angels themselves tremble at his name. Is Metatron a god, or simply the first human to receive a prehistoric upgrade? We have reached the threshold where the theological veil begins to tear, revealing something much colder beneath. If we view these texts through a technological lens rather than a moral one, the language changes. Enoch records a detail that most casual readers overlook. The watchers didn't just take wives. They began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish. In the light of the 21st century, we have a different word for it: genetic splicing. This wasn't just a localized transgression. It was a global bioengineering project. Think of the chimeras that haunt the foundations of every major civilization: the jackal-headed gods of Egypt, the bullmen of Crete, the serpent-tailed Nagas of the East. What if the Minotaur and the Sphinx weren't myths, but failed laboratory experiments, biological waste abandoned by a sophisticated intelligence? When Enoch describes the houses of hailstone and portals of fire, he isn't describing a heaven of fluffy clouds. He is describing a sensory-overloaded witness trying to explain high technology. A house made of crystal with walls of mosaic hail sounds remarkably like a pressurized hull made of advanced ceramics or glass. The tongues of fire that carried him into the sky weren't divine chariots. They were propulsion systems. The earth didn't just become wicked. It became corrupted at the cellular level. The Nephilim were the apex of this instability. Being so genetically aggressive, they consumed the world's resources until there was nothing left but each other. This wasn't a spiritual crisis. It was an ecological disaster triggered by runaway technology. If you think the story of the Watchers is isolated to a few dusty scrolls in the Levant, you haven't been looking at the map. Across the planet, separated by oceans and millennia, the human memory is scarred by the exact same trauma. In Mesopotamia, they called them the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. Beneath them served the Igigi, the sky dwellers who eventually revolted, mirroring the insurrection of Samyaza. The Lakota elders whisper of red-haired giants who dominated the plains, monsters born of a different sun. The Inca looked up at the Viracocha, tall, pale architects of the impossible. The Zulus speak of the Chitauri, the dictators, the serpent beings who arrived to harvest the earth. Travel to the Dogon people of Mali, and they will tell you of the Nomo, the masters of the water who descended from Sirius with precise astronomical knowledge that the tribe should not have possessed. The blueprint is identical across all these cultures. High technology described as magic, interbreeding described as sin, a global purge described as justice. How can every culture have the same fantasy if none of it ever happened? The echo is too loud to be a lie. It is the sound of a universal truth hitting a wall of silence. But the legend of the patriarch didn't vanish with the suppression of his book. In the late 1500s, within the shadow-drenched halls of the Elizabethan court, the Enochian frequency began to hum once more. Dr. John Dee, mathematician, cartographer, and personal astrologer to the Queen, clutched an obsidian scrying mirror, attempting to tune into a broadcast that had been silent for millennia. Alongside the medium Edward Kelly, Dee claimed to have made contact not with spirits, but with the architects of reality. These beings did not speak English, Latin, or Greek. They spoke what they called the true language of heaven. Dee called it Enochian, believing it was the very tongue lost at the fall of Babel, the language used by Enoch to converse with the Watchers. This wasn't merely a collection of mystical sounds. Modern linguists analyzing Dee's meticulous journals have found something unsettling. Enochian possesses its own internal consistency, a complex syntax, and a mathematical grammar that should not exist in a 16th century fabrication. It is a language built for a higher processing speed than the human mind. Was John Dee talking to angels, or was he tuning into an ancient, lingering broadcast left behind by those who once ruled the mountaintops? Enoch was never meant to be a librarian. He was a witness. He didn't just hear the names of the Watchers. He stood in the rooms where they were born and where they were judged. To read his accounts is to realize that our ancestors didn't fear the dark. They feared the light. They feared the head of days, a presence so ancient and immense that the foundations of the universe seemed like nothing more than dust on his raiment. The book was buried. The giants were killed. The Watchers were chained. Yet the mystery has recently taken a physical, undeniable form. In the last few years, the discovery of massive, unexplained skeletons in the Peruvian highlands and the ongoing investigation into the anomalous DNA of the Paracas skulls have reignited a fire that the Council of Laodicea thought it had extinguished. These elongated crania, possessing 25% more volume and 60% more weight than standard human skulls, lack the sagittal suture common to all primates. They are not merely deformed, they are biologically distinct. As we look at the modern sky, at the UAPs our sensors can no longer ignore, and the CRISPR technology we use to rewrite our own genetic code, the silence of the Church feels less like a dismissal and more like a warning. If Enoch was taken so that he could explain the end of the world to the people of the future, then we are the ones he was writing for. We are the generation standing at the edge of the same crystalline gate. The Watchers did not just leave behind stories, they left a legacy in our very marrow. And as we begin to play with the same genetic fire that consumed the antediluvian world, we must ask ourselves, if the architects of the silence are watching us once more, what have they decided our sentence should be?